So ladies, gentlemen, fellow Kryptonians out there, welcome to my very in-depth Superman trailer breakdown. And I know by now you've probably seen quite a few other breakdowns on YouTube, but as you can tell from the length of this video, I mean it. Like, we really get into every last detail. So we're going to talk about everything we learned, every major bonus detail that we've learned from James Gunn that released alongside this trailer, the little clues to the story that was seeded, how things could even unfold, things that you may have missed, of course, Easter eggs, theories, and so much more. So honestly, guys, strap yourselves in. So of course, we need to start right at the beginning. We see Superman crash land in the Arctic, likely somewhere very close to the Fortress of Solitude. We can tell he's very defeated and bruised, with very labored breathing and even bleeding quite a bit. So whoever he was in an encounter with really put him through the ringer. Now this could be after an encounter with Ultraman or The Engineer, who we see him fighting later on in the trailer. Plus, we know that Maria Gabriella de Fria, who plays the Engineer, was indeed filming in Norway, where they shot the Fortress of Solitude scenes. So there could also be a bit of a continued encounter in this location, but that could also be at a different part of the plot. I also say that because we see an inside shot of the Fortress of Solitude here, with Superman devastated at the loss of his Kryptonian robot. Now on the channel, you may remember that we've been speculating for quite a long time that just like in All-Star Superman, that the Fortress would likely house a robot or two. And there's heavy influences here from that comic, as we know, on this movie, down to even the blue cape that the robot is wearing. It is also possible that there's some influences from the Kryptonian robot named Kelex, who was actually Superman's father Jor-El's robot, which if they add that backstory onto the All-Star Superman design here, I think that would make for even more of a devastating scene. And I say that, and I find this scene very touching, because given how upset Superman is here with how his Fortress of Solitude companion seems to be pretty much like at least half destroyed, this robot has likely been one of the few links to Clark's Kryptonian heritage that he's had ever since forming the Fortress, likely quite a few years ago, since Superman usually does that before presenting himself to the world. Now, of course, Clark has other links to Krypton, such as his cousin, Supergirl, who's being played by Millie Alcock. And then there's the question of if we'll get a Kryptonian AI Jor-El in this film, which you would have to think we will, but there hasn't been any hint of that so far. I mean, this is just the first teaser, so there's a lot more to show in the official trailer 1, trailer 2, the final trailer, but regardless, this Fortress robot has probably been with Clark since the beginning, helping him come into his own when he set out to discover more about his Kryptonian heritage. And the question is, what even happened to him? Well, that could come back to the other characters who were filming in this same location, as I briefly went over. So it would be pretty crazy if the Engineer and Ultraman and Lex Luthor get access to the Fortress of Solitude, and this could even be the fallout of that. Now, another thing I appreciate about this shot is that we get to see a tiny glimpse at what the interior of the Fortress of Solitude looks like over to the left there. Now, you may remember I mentioned a long while back that I had actually been lucky enough to see some behind-the-scenes shots of the Fortress interior with crystals there and a Kryptonian-looking console, and I kind of described it as a Doctor Who-esque TARDIS technology inspired. And even though we don't see that console in this shot, you can still see the various other tech in the background on different platforms as the crystals go through the structure, which I do think matches up to what I saw, but I don't know if it's another angle of the room or another angle in the Fortress. But speaking of the Fortress of Solitude, in the teaser for this teaser trailer, we actually got to see a glimpse at what could be the possible entrance to it. Now, it's totally possible that this could just be a metallic floor to the Fortress, and also in recent merch that you may or may not have seen released on the Warner Brothers shop, we get to see what the exterior of the Fortress of Solitude looks like. And another bonus detail here is that we've just learned from James Gunn that he's got a giant fortress that springs up from the ground. So, wow, I didn't expect that the fortress literally comes out of the ground each time he goes there, which, you know, is a good way to keep it hidden, after all. Now, that totally explains the shot that we get of the crystals of the fortress erupting from the ground of the Arctic, as it must be a scene of the fortress somewhat waking up as Superman returns to it. Now, lastly, with these fortress scenes, we get to see Superman whistling for Krypto, and he comes in like a storm. And Superman asks him to bring him home, so Krypto is literally going to grab Clark by the cape and take him away. Now the question is, where is home? The first thing that crossed my mind was, you know, perhaps Krypto with his superdog strength would fly Superman back to the Kent farm to lay low and recover, but perhaps home is also the fortress, as they're already very close by given where he crash landed, and it's another location where he has the opportunity to recuperate from his injuries, and I wouldn't be surprised if Clark keeps Krypto in the Fortress of Solitude, given, you know, it might be kind of sketchy walking that dog on the streets of Metropolis, but I'm sure, given that he's Superman, he flies there each and every day to check in with his pal, take him on a walk in an asteroid belt in space, all of that good stuff, and Krypto is just awesome in this, and I am very, very happy with it. I know going this fantastical isn't in everyone's tastes, but again, Gunn is giving us a very DC Comics fantastical universe, and speaking of All-Star Superman, it's really just ripped right out of that, down to the cape that Clark likely made for him, or maybe Kara, and his collar, and I just love how unapologetically comic book all of this is. Now, this won't be the only scenes that we see of Krypto in the movie, obviously, as I'm sure he'll be about in the fortress scenes, back at the Kent farm, maybe, and we know that he shares scenes with Mr. Terrific from when they were shooting on the streets of Metropolis. I had also originally thought a while ago that perhaps Krypto was going to be introduced to Clark in this movie, maybe even as a byproduct of Lex Luthor's experimentations using Superman's DNA or something like that. But it's clear here that Superman is pretty familiar with Krypto. Now, Krypto in the comics is also sometimes sent to Earth before Clark is, as kind of like a little beta test, if you will. But I'm actually thinking that Kara, Supergirl herself, brought Krypto with her to Earth when she landed sometime in the past. Now, Gunn stated that Kara lived on a piece of Krypton that drifted away from the planet for the first 14 years of her life. So it is possible that she's been on Earth for quite a few years now, especially since the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow's story picks up on her 21st birthday. And since that time, Clark has gotten to know Krypto pretty well, and maybe Krypto's been left in his care as Kara maybe goes off to reconcile her own identity with the culture shock of Earth that she's experienced, leading into the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow movie that James Gunn has also just recently confirmed is filming in January. Now, one last additional detail about Krypto and Superman that Gunn revealed yesterday is that his relationship with Krypto is complicated. He's not nearly the best dog in scenes. There's a lot more to Krypto than you see in this trailer. So with regards to he's not nearly the best dog in scenes, that might be a reference to that scene with Krypto and Mister Terrific. And all I'll say there to avoid spoilers is, if you know, you know. Now, next up in the trailer, we get our first official look at Clark Kent as he's making his way to the Daily Planet for work. In a rush, mind you, as he's likely late due to doing a few saves here and there, possibly even around the world. Now, I love the vibe that this gives across. Gunn is bringing us this Clark Kent who puts in quite a bit of effort into separating himself from his Superman demeanor, and I like that a lot. You can already tell from the scenes we see of him and the way he just kind of looks around and looks at Lois that he is a bit endearingly dorky. And this is, despite what you may hear out there, very, very true to Clark Kent in the comics. This is also in combination with his hairstyle, which I thought was a really good move to make. I know not everyone is a fan of it, but to me, I don't even think it looks that bad. A lot of people even think that this is a wig, but I am insanely confident that it's not, as David Corenswet has quite curly, wavy hair, and as you can see, it's fairly long in this shot in the movie as well. But when he's Superman, it's just made like a bit more straight, as the length kind of combs back a bit, disguising that length that can also be used for his curls as Clark Kent. Now, through having his broccoli-esque curls, it really does give a much more disguised look compared to other Superman iterations we've had in recent years, in where they've mostly just relied on the glasses to change. And I totally get it. Like, regardless, the glasses separating this man's dual identity is quite a reach. Even with this hairstyle on David Corenswet is realistically probably not enough, but my point is, at least he actually does look quite a bit different with the design choice that they've gone for with this Clark Kent presentation. Now, as Clark enters the Daily Planet office, we get a brief look of Steve Lombard walking down while Clark is on the phone, likely juggling too many things at once after neglecting them to save the world. We've had other shots, of course, of the Daily Planet crew in the teaser for this teaser, but we haven't had any trailer shots of Perry White. But that didn't exactly stop Wendell Pierce from posting this picture of Perry smoking a cigar to his Twitter account. Also, this could be reaching a bit, but in the teaser for the teaser, we see Jimmy wearing this watch, which kind of looks similar to the one he sometimes has in the comics, even the one in All-Star Superman, in where he can actually signal for Superman even if he's a crazy distance away. I mean, you never know. We're gonna have to wait and see, but as we know, Jimmy usually knows Superman's identity. He might not know right away, but he might find out in the movie. Maybe he does know right away, and that's why he could have that watch. We're gonna have to wait and see. We then get to see Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane, who's just grabbed a coffee, and as Clark rushes to his desk, still on the phone, she takes a glance over at him as if to acknowledge him, but she notices that he's right in the thick of it, and as she goes to her own desk, she decides to take another glance back. And of course, this brings up the whole topic of, does Lois know that Clark is Superman? Well, you may have already heard my thoughts about this, and from when we first saw this look and the way Clark looks back at her, I thought that at this point in the movie, she didn't know that Clark Kent is Superman, but perhaps would, maybe find out later on in the film. And before that point, she's just had some form of relationship with Superman himself journalistically, because Gunn did say that Lois knows Superman. But then my mind kind of changed when we got that shot of them kissing in either Lois or Clark's apartment, I assume. And the thing is, Lois is wearing the exact same thing she wore that day in the Daily Planet office. And you can tell that Clark is wearing his work t-shirt, his hair is styled the same as his Clark Kent mode. So now I think that since we're picking up with Superman already established in this universe to some extent, maybe a year or two, maybe 3 years, Lois may very well indeed know that Clark is Superman and found out sometime in the past. And I'm even wondering if they're keeping their relationship fairly quiet in the Daily Planet office because they don't really want their colleagues to know about it just yet. Just, given the way that they look at each other here. But then after work, they're kind of desperate to show their affection for one another after masking it all day. Now, of course, I could be wrong here, but something is telling me that they are keeping their relationship fairly low-key to avoid the talk of the office at the Daily Planet, and this would also make sense as to why we see Lois all cozied up with Superman in shots in the trailer as well. Of course, it is still possible that she doesn't know and then finds out in the movie, and these scenes all unfold that way, but I do think that it is actually the other way around. Now, the next shot in the trailer shows us the Kent farm, and we have Clark Kent sat down with Jonathan Kent played by Pruitt Taylor Vince. Now, initially, when I saw this, I thought this scene could be Clark going back home due to the trailer depicting the people of Metropolis rejecting Superman, of which, of course, we'll get into in just a bit, and perhaps, seeking guidance from good old Pa Kent. But now, just like many other people who are thinking this very same thing, it seems that Clark could very well be the one comforting Pa Kent more than he is to him. And it's making everyone wonder if there could be a switch up in this movie in where it's not Jonathan Kent who dies, but rather Martha, who has possibly passed away. Now, as many of you probably already know, Jonathan Kent often passes away from a heart attack before Clark Kent even becomes Superman. Now, this isn't the case all the time, as he has been around in the early Superman days as well, but it would be an interesting take to switch it up here. Now, we do know that Martha Kent has been cast in the movie, and she's being played by Neva Howell, so it is possible that she could be in flashback scenes. That's if we get any of those at all. Or of course, she could be in present day scenes, but passes away during the events of the film. Obviously, it's hard to know, but it's an interesting theory nonetheless. Now, on another side note theory here, this could also be the case that Martha Kent is fine and dandy, but it's just that Pa Kent, Jonathan here, is telling Clark that he's dying. And that would go into the whole situation of how, despite how powerful Superman is, there is nothing that he can do to stop that from happening, which is another kind of nice kind of Superman thing to lean into. So it could honestly be any of these things. And a big part of this film is about Clark Kent reconciling his human upbringing with his Kryptonian heritage, just learning how he fits in with this world as he's emerging more and more as Superman. So I'm not sure if we're going to get a bunch of Ma and Pa Kent scenes in the film, but of course, they'd be pretty integral to telling the story of Clark's journey of identity in the plot of the film. And so the next shot in the trailer is of this young girl who is literally about to get wrecked by the Kaiju footstep, and Superman comes in last second to shield her from the explosion caused by this monster footprint. Now, this was such a fantastic and, dare I say it, quintessential Superman save. But let's talk about that kaiju for a second. So, there's been rumors of the film having a kaiju that were then looking even more solid when those toy leaks happened, which you may or may not know about, but one of them listed a kaiju and a baby kaiju. And as we know, the movie picks up with action, as James Gunn said, and from what I've heard personally behind the scenes, the beginning of the movie's action could very well be Superman saving the day from this kaiju. So it's unlikely that this is going to happen later on in the movie, but rather right from the get-go. Now again here, I know some people find this kind of thing strange, but I actually really love it. As per James Gunn's influence here, and as I often go on about, he's really injecting a lot of love for all kinds of eras of Superman from the comics in this movie. And here, you can tell that this kaiju is influenced by this comic book that you're seeing on screen right now, which actually goes all the way back to the 1950s, with the tagline being, "The Beast from Krypton." Now, no, I don't think that this is literally a kaiju beast from Krypton. All I'm focusing on and trying to highlight here is the way James Gunn is ripping from all of the different ages from the comic books of Superman, and how that even helps demonstrate and really world build how fantastical this DCU is really going to be. Now, we also get these shots in the trailer of multiple buildings falling over like dominoes into one another, and this could be a result of the kaiju on its way to the heart of Metropolis. Now, some people have been saying that this building here is actually the Daily Planet, and they're saying that because it could match up to some of the set photo scenes of rubble on the streets outside the Daily Planet building. But I actually don't think that the location of this building matches the surrounding area of the Daily Planet that we got a glimpse of in that very first teaser for this teaser trailer. And I'd be pretty surprised if the entire Daily Planet building itself got completely and entirely destroyed. So I think these buildings are more on the edge of Metropolis rather than this shot you're seeing here where the Daily Planet is located. Now, I'm not saying that some rubble or damage to the Daily Planet building won't happen because, we saw those set photos, but, I don't think that these are the same buildings, but let me know if you disagree. Now, the question is, where does this creature in fact come from? And could anyone else be involved in it? Well, that's a question I have a bit of a theory about that I'll dive into when it comes to some of the other antagonists in this movie. But speaking of antagonists, this is when we get our first shot of Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor, as he looks out the tower of Luthor Corp and notices Superman flying through the sky. And when he does, he turns around with a very pissed off face. And we know from James Gunn that the main villain of the movie is indeed Lex. And there's a few ideas that I have of what I think contribute to his role and motivations during the plot of the film. Also, just notice the engineer on top of this part of the Luthor Corp tower in the wider shot of the building. We don't really get any engineer shots other than this in the trailer. However, there is a trailer currently playing in theaters that does offer another shot of the engineer, Lex, and Ultraman walking into some location. I don't know if it's the fortress or some other place. Nothing too crazy, but it is another glimpse. I don't think I've shown it in the video just in case there's any copyright stuff there, but again, nothing too crazy, but you might see that online. But back to Lex here, James Gunn has in fact revealed, surprise, surprise, that Lex Luthor hates Superman's guts from the beginning, although they don't know each other personally. And I think that last line there is really interesting because it leads me to think that yes, Luthor hates the idea of Superman, but at this point in time, until there is some inevitable scenes later on in the trailer that show this changes, but until then, they haven't exchanged any words. Now, why does Lex Luthor hate Superman's guts so much, even before they've even spoke? Well, of course, it's for all the typical reasons, but I think the foundational reason in this iteration as to why before they even meet and exchange words is because he hates what Superman represents and also what spotlight he could possibly be taking away from Lex's own ambitions. Now, Nicholas Hoult cited one of his favorite inspirations that he drew from for the movie is the Luthor Man of Steel comic book. And in that, Lex talks about how all men are created equal. All men. You are not a man. Those red eyes, I'm sure they look right through me, like I am nothing more than a nuisance. But when I see you, I see something no man can ever be. I see the end of our potential, the end of our achievements. Now, the reason why I read that out is because I think that is exactly where we're at with this Luthor. I think Luthor in this world works incredibly hard to be essentially what Superman is getting credit for. And that's something Lex views as potentially infuriatingly easy. Whereas for himself and what he's built with Luthor Corp and how hard he's worked to reach this potential of man, it's always eclipsed by this Superman. Nicholas Hoult also said this about Lex in Superman very recently. Obviously, he's smart and ruthless, and he has to outmaneuver Superman on certain levels because he can't match him in others. But there's also something about this character, hopefully from my standpoint, where even though you perhaps don't agree with his process, you can understand where he's coming from and why what he's pushing as his ideology is perhaps better for humanity. So with all of this combined together, and despite Lex having his own devious ways of helping out, if you will, as Holt touches on here, he is a ruthless guy, and we definitely won't agree with his process, but it's coming from a place of wanting to better humanity with whatever ideology this is that he's pushing. but in his own approach. So again, to touch back on it, seeing this Superman likely stealing the limelight of Lex's painstaking efforts, I feel like that scene in the teaser of him looking out the window here, seeing Superman likely flying to save the day, perfectly depicts the reasonings for his utter resentment for the Man of Steel. Now, some other ideas that I have that links to all of this is I wouldn't be surprised if Lex tries to take down that kaiju himself, posing himself as a protector to Metropolis. But I think Lex, with also his Luthor Corp, has all kinds of resources that make it possible for him to want to do this himself. We know that from the Superman comic For All Seasons, which is another influence on this movie. In that comic book, Lex has his own Lex Troopers, which basically fly around and try to do what Superman is doing, but they're no way near as efficient as him. And if anything, they do a bit of a bodge job in their saving attempts, with the example of how in that comic book, Superman uses his X-ray vision to see that they've actually left a woman behind in a burning building. So once again, he shows up Luthor. And we actually see in the trailer at the Luthor Corp encampment on this beach, a bunch of troops in fairly unique suits firing on Mr. Terrific there. Now, obviously, the suits don't exactly match up to the For All Seasons design, but I do think that these troops, if you will, are in fact enforcers for Luthor Corp and are this movie's iteration of Lex Troopers, if you will. Now, I'm not entirely sure what this Luthor Corp beach encampment is all about. We also got another shot of it in the teaser for the teaser trailer. Perhaps it's an outpost for Lex to monitor threats to the city or track Superman, who knows? But I will get into this a little bit more later into the breakdown as it ties in some other very interesting things. But either way here, I imagine scenes like this we can see of Luthor could very well be him, directing an operation from mission control, if you will, within the Luthor Corp building. And again, Superman just ends up doing the job for him. So getting past now all of the likely baseline reasonings for Lex's motivations for hating Superman in this movie, it's also quite likely that he gets to the point of being so angry and infuriated that he tries to defame Superman. So this takes us back to that one point in the trailer where we see the people of Metropolis are completely rejecting Superman, even throwing stuff at him. And it's a good thing that Superman isn't Homelander, because we all know what happened when that bottle or can got thrown at him. And I'm willing to bet that this isn't because of a genuine mistake that Superman has made, but rather something that Lex has set up to make him look bad. Lex will then likely use other enforcers in the movie under his employ, if you will, so not the troopers, but a couple of the apparent secondary antagonists, such as the Engineer, who's a member of the DC Comics team The Authority, as well as the black-suited mysterious figure seen on set, who most believe to be Gunn's revamped take on Ultraman to apprehend Superman and take him into custody. Now, I can't really speak confidently about Ultraman, as the whole idea of is Gunn, all while making him look different from his comic counterpart, still going to make him a clone of Superman in the film, even though Ultraman in the comics isn't a clone, he's an alternate universe version of Superman. But the point is, under that black suit, is it David Corenswet playing the role, other than the stunt stand-in person under the suit? That remains to be seen, right? But as for the Engineer, I believe that she believes she's doing the right thing. As in the comics, she's not a villain. She's, if anything, this anti-hero. And by the ending of this film, I suspect that once Superman's name is cleared for whatever Lex pinned on him, she'll go on to form or join the Authority Group, which is actually another DCU movie they're developing behind the scenes. Regardless, though, we do get some very brief snippets of a fight between Ultraman and Superman at this stadium in Metropolis, and we do know that the Engineer is there as well, and Superman kind of gets his arse beat. Now, I think scenes like this are just going to show incredible Superman action. Now, all of this could possibly lead to the scene in the trailer that we see later on, and where Superman is literally in some kind of containment cell or box, whatever you want to call it. Now, I believe this will be after he's been apprehended. What's also interesting to point out is that there appears to be a whole row of these cell units as the shot expands out to the other side, and you can see other people in other boxes maybe right before Superman shatters it with his punch. Now, that leads me to wonder if Lex has captured other people in the DCU with his possible resentment for metahumans, and maybe he uses them for experimentation. Who knows? This also makes me wonder about Metamorpho, because yes, he's usually linked more to Stag Industries, which we know is in the film. But yeah, I mean, I admit that these vague teasers in the trailer are quite ambiguous, so this is heavy speculation, but I think it's all connected here, and we are getting somewhere with it. Also, of course, there's the question of why wouldn't Superman just be able to break out of this unit like this anyway? Unless, of course, Lex has a way of keeping him in there, such as using a red sunlight to render his powers useless. Maybe it's coated in kryptonite. It's got to be something like that. Otherwise, he'd not be able to be contained in there in the first place. But speaking of that, also, as I zoom in, you can see these two other characters standing there, whether that's in another cell or in a reflection, and one of the characters appears to be creating this bright white light, and it appears that this could actually be Metamorpho. Now, you can slightly tell that it's Metamorpho because you can see the difference in his legs. One of them looks a bit normal on the right-hand side, but on the left, you can see that it has a bit of that Metamorpho skin texture to it. And he's in shorts, kind of like Metamorpho from the comics, and the top part of his face and his head could match Anthony Carrigan under that makeup and just this overall look of Metamorpho that we see in that one shot later on in the trailer. Now, as for who's standing next to him, just kind of shielding his face, I'm not sure, but I'm now wondering if Superman's cell does indeed have like this red solar light depowering him, and Metamorpho manages to create this blinding white light to temporarily give him back his powers enough to smash through the glass. Either way though, Lex does appear to be getting exactly what he wants at whatever point of the movie this scene takes place in, as there's so many people forsaking Superman here. And through achieving that, I mean, think about it, Luthor's plan is working out, as people would technically, in the future, would go on to rely on him and his methods and the ideology that he's pushing, perhaps a world in where people don't give all of their trust to metahumans and superheroes, let alone Superman. And I think this will all lead to the Daily Planet crew being quite key for this plot point in the movie. With regards to whatever Lex has done to defame Superman, you can trust that Lois Lane and the Daily Planet crew will be using their journalistic skills to prove his innocence and expose Luthor for being behind it all, thus restoring Superman's name to Metropolis. Now, speaking of that, briefly going back to the Luthor Corp encampment on the beach, like I said earlier, where you have all of those Lex troopers firing on Mr. Terrific, and we can also see this woman shielding herself. Now, I think, yes, this could be Lois, and I wouldn't be surprised if Lois, who doesn't take no for an answer, tried to sneak into this location to get some kind of intel that would help clear Superman's name, and she's accompanied by Mr. Terrific for her protection. It's also really awesome getting to see a glimpse of Mr. Terrific using his T-spheres here. There's around 4 of them floating above him, projecting that little bubble that's shielding him from all of the Lex Trooper fire, with another one right above the troopers here, as he's just kind of standing there as if like, is that all you got? And I bet that extra T-sphere will be going around knocking the guns out of their hands or taking them out. Now, Superman, facing this reaction from the public, will all be a part of one of the underlying themes to the story that we got into earlier on in this breakdown, with him just, finding where he fits into this world, and if the people of the world will accept him for who he is. Now, I really like that scene of how Gardner just comes in with Mr. Terrific, and as Gunn likes to call them, they're Superman's metahuman compatriots, and since Superman isn't getting any privacy here, as he's dealing with all of the backlash from the public outside. Guy uses his Green Lantern ring to conjure up these lantern-esque curtains to block the view of all of the people who are smearing his name. Kind of like, give the guy a break. Now, Gunn did also mention in a recent interview that came out alongside this trailer that we're embracing all of the Superman mythology. He has friends who are other superheroes. He has people he doesn't get along with as well who are other superheroes. He has a lot of things that we love from the Superman comics that we haven't been able to see as much of in filmed media, and definitely haven't been able to see in a grounded way, which is what I hope we've created. Now, I think Gunn mentioning that he doesn't get along with other people who are also superheroes, that could possibly be Guy Gardner. Just also with Guy Gardner's character in the comics, he is a bit kind of bullheaded. He does have a development where he comes a bit more loose and whatnot, but he can be a little bit of a jerk. And I think the film will start off that way, but along the course of the plot and their interactions together, I believe that Guy will find a new respect for Superman that he perhaps didn't have from the get-go. Now, all of this stems from the ideas that in the present-day DCU, as Gunn has said, there's been metahumans and superheroes for a long time. But as time has gone on, there's more of them today than there used to be. And they're more of an issue today than they used to be. Now, we know that Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner, and Hawkgirl are all wearing superhero suits that have the Lord Tech logo on it, which is Maxwell Lord's corporate company within the DC universe. Now, going off the back of what Gunn detailed about this already established world of superheroes and metahumans, I've always suspected that superheroes have got to this point of not being as individual as they used to be, and perhaps have even lost a lot of their own superhero autonomy along the years compared to that of the days of old, which could, go back to the days of the Justice Society of America in World War II. And then there's this new hero in recent years, Superman, who isn't adhering to the more, let's say, regulated superhero world. And maybe this causes some tensions. And I suspect that it most certainly does with Lex Luthor, as Superman standing outside of the parameters in the superhero space of the world would be another thing that infuriates him, as we were getting into earlier. And yes, that can even tie into what Nicholas Hoult said about why what Lex is pushing as his ideology is perhaps better for humanity. So what I mean is perhaps Lex endorses a more regulated superhero world, and hence why he's trying to have his own control on situations through using his own Luthor Corp resources that would usually require the involvement and help of superheroes in situations where there's frickin' kaijus going throughout the city. But it would also be a bit different for a lot of the heroes like Guy Gardner and Mr. Terrific, who are seeing this lone wolf go around and not doing things the way that other heroes are used to doing or seeing. But again, that's another big aspect of this movie, and what I think pertains to the original title of the film, which was Superman Legacy. And by the ending of this film, I think Clark, just like in the Kingdom Come comic book storyline, but in a bit of a reverse twist here, and I call it the reverse Kingdom Come theory, will go on to inspire a lot of metahumans and superheroes to regain their superhero autonomy and reject this current status quo of how they think they're supposed to operate out there in the world. Like, think about it. Superman isn't wearing anyone else's uniform but his own. And this could lead Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl to one day getting their own individual and more unique comic book accurate suits as opposed to their Lord Tech company versions they're wearing in this movie. Now back to Lex for a second. We also see him holding this gun. Now it's definitely an interesting choice of gun, and sure, like, he could be with anyone in this scene, but let's just say it is a similar location to the scene with Superman in the cell. He could have kryptonite bullets in it, which, isn't exactly a crazy speculation or conclusion to come to. But then that just interests me to know how much Lex knows about Superman, and how did he discover his weakness is kryptonite, or how did he know that a red sunlight would depower him? It's obviously really hard to tell at this point, but talking about kryptonite bullets is the easiest speculation to go to. Now, next up, we get the scene of a bunch of civilians running away from what appears to be a bombardment of explosions happening in the DC fictional country of Boravia, which is in Europe, which actually borders the country we've seen in the events taking place in Creature Commandos called Pakistan. Now, this was such a heartwarming scene as we have this child here in the middle of all of this chaos and potential war, pulling up a flag as he's calling out to Superman. Now, among all of this chaos, he has just one last hope, and that, of course, is Superman, and you know that Superman will arrive to help save the people from this danger. And if these scenes are connected in the way the trailer presents them, but I do want to emphasize that trailers don't show scenes in order in the film, but just for the sake of it here, we can see Lex once again looking infuriated as he's looking at something. And then the next scene right after that shows a shot of a Luthor Corp TV showing reports of the Boravian troops amassing at the border, as all of the civilians are chanting Superman's name. And as we went over earlier, Lex can't stand that. Now, as the trailer continues, we get more shots of Hawkgirl flying into the city, and it's kind of hard to tell if she does have nth metal wings here, because in Creature Commandos, with that episode that recently released, it does look like she does have nth metal, but here, they do seem a lot more feathery, with the light even shining through some of the feathers on the lower side of the wing, which implies to me that it's more organic matter like feathers rather than that of nth metal material. But it is possible that it could still be a combination of the two. And then things get to the point in the trailer where we see the same scene that we had revealed to us in that first look at the Superman suit, in where we saw Superman putting his boots on. And back then, we were all wondering what the heck this giant floating jellyfish ball was in the sky. Now, theories back then were pretty vast, but now we get a much better look at it in motion, and now we see these kind of like almost plasma solar flare-y, almost looking tendrils coming off of it, which makes me wonder even more if the theory behind it being Solaris could maybe be true. Now, if you don't know already, Solaris is essentially this artificial sun, and I really don't know for sure if that is what this is, but Solaris is indeed in All-Star Superman, which again is an influence on this movie. Now, I don't think the events would play out remotely the same as per All-Star Superman, where Superman is dying, and I've seen some people even speculate that this could tie into the theory of how, what if this is something Luthor has actually conjured up on the city of Metropolis, perhaps even in addition to the Kaiju. I mean, think about it. As Nicholas Hoult said, he is a ruthless guy, and we won't agree with his process, but it's coming from a place of wanting to better humanity. So I do wonder if Lex's very questionable process, which could involve making superheroes look very bad, could be to create situations like this, in where his aim is to make heroes look incompetent, and for rather himself to save the day, to further push, as Holt said, his ideology in how superheroes aren't the answer, but mankind is. So could this actually even really be a false threat, perhaps even a hologram in the image of something like Solaris? I'm not sure, but that's where we get down the rabbit hole of crazy speculation. But I think, again here, with everything being said and done, there's some shreds of truth in the conversation that we're exploring. You can also tell that Guy Gardner is likely outside fighting it, as per the original speculations when we saw that photo, while Superman is with Lois. As you can see the tendrils if I zoom in, and it lights up all green. Bottom line though, I wouldn't really be surprised if these kaiju threats are all down to Luthor's very questionable process of dealing with what he wants to achieve. Now, as for the final things I want to add into this video, it's just some stuff I want to address from the trailer, which I don't think is necessarily what people think it is, but I know people will ask me about it if I don't talk about it in this breakdown. Now, we see this officer outside the Daily Planet reading this newspaper, and people think that Gorilla Grod could be featured on the front page. Now, the newspaper headline reads, "Hammer of Boravia creates havoc downtown." But after looking for other shots of this paper, we see Clark holding it on his way into the Daily Planet office, and it's like, you know, well, okay. But then we get a much better look of it when Jimmy Olsen is reading the paper, and to me, when you zoom in, the havoc downtown displayed in the photo is just a giant plume of black smoke. So no, I don't think that this is a reference to Gorilla Grodd in the DCU, and I know we saw Gorilla Grodd featured in the latest canonical DCU Creature Commandos episode, so it is cool to know that he's out there in this already established world, as are probably every other DC character that we know and love, but I don't think that this is a reference to him in the Superman movie. And then there's the other thing in where people are pointing out how in the Stag Industries building, once Superman has gone in there, that this image could be the cloned Superman because the symbol is reversed, and it could be Ultraman out of the black suit and in a fake Superman suit. I get what people are saying, but I think that this is just a flipped shot, or like the reflection, which is why the Stag Industries logo would be, you know, the correct way, but the Superman logo is reversed. Now, the reason why I can instantly debunk this, in my opinion, is because this battle-damaged suit that we're seeing flipped in the Bizarro-esque sense is the exact same battle-damaged version of Corenswet's Superman outside when the citizens of Metropolis are throwing things at him like that can, and his symbol is the correct way. His curl is the correct way, and so do you see what I mean? It's just a flipped shot, which trailers quite often do. So this is the same suit. It's got the same amount of battle damage on it. He's going into the same Stag Industries building. It's just in there, they flipped the image. So no, I don't think it's that either. But I think that is everything for now with regards to this Superman teaser trailer breakdown. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You know, I tried to go through as much as I possibly could. Now, of course, there will be more videos to come over the holiday period where I'm taking a few days off. I'm planning on doing a DCU discussion series video that we run here on the channel where I answer your guys' questions, theories, comments, ideas, you name it. And it's probably going to be very heavily Superman focused, but I didn't want to make it until the Superman trailer released, so we would have a lot more ammunition to ramble on about for quite a long time. So submit any questions, any theories, anything you want me to talk about in the DCU discussion series video that I'll be uploading sometime around Christmas. Obviously, this can involve the Superman trailer, but also other DCU stuff out there. But with that being said, I'm gonna love you and leave you now, guys. I really appreciate it if you left a like on this video, and if you got to this point in the video, you're amazing, and you know, you can prove it by leaving this hashtag along with whatever other comment you're gonna leave. Hashtag take me home. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Kryptonians out there, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your support. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you people of the DCU in the next video. Goodbye.